Good afternoon. My name is Carrie Howard, and I am going to, this is a presentation on the characteristics of ASD, or otherwise known as autism spectrum disorder. I'll be sharing my screen with you here. So autism is a very rather complex neurodevelopmental disorder that varies in its severity and its intensity. In order to qualify for a diagnosis, you also must have these characteristics and symptoms of the disorder very early on in life. It is possible to be diagnosed later on in life, but these symptoms must have been present from an early age. Some of these symptoms include deficits in the areas of communication and social emotional relationships. And we also see restrictive and repetitive behaviors in students. Some of the cognitive characteristics of autism are, I would say they're very varied. You can have students with fairly high IQs and students who could also classify for dual diagnosis of intellectual disability based on IQ assessments or other means of assessments. So you have students who even could be savants where they are extremely intelligent. Even we would consider them genius level. So the cognitive characteristics are quite varied. Neurological characteristics, there seem to be areas of the brain that are affected by autism. It can affect executive functioning. We also see some comorbidity with other disorders such as ADHD, epilepsy, Tourette syndrome. So that it does have an effect on the brain and the way the brain is wired. If you were to take a scan of an autistic brain, you would see that the synapses aren't always communicating with each other. It seems to be sort of a characteristic of autism. They might be very right-brained or left-brained. So we're going to see that some of the neurological characteristics are different than a typical student. Behavior characteristics, again, are quite varied, but we do see patterns, challenges in these areas, especially. Some of them are a result of the communication deficits. So the frustration level that it can cause to not be able to express your wants and needs can cause behaviors, because behavior is also a form of communication. So we might see negative behavior, aggressive behavior, self-injurious behavior. Those can all be present. Let me pause for a second. Just pause. Okay, so those are some of the behavior characteristics. Also, restrictive and repetitive behavior. So you might see body movements. We would sometimes call this self-stimulatory behavior, or for short, we call it stimming, where it seems to be a body's way to sort of normalize the sensory input that they're receiving, or to calm their bodies down, like they're doing like some rocking or some hand flapping, or even noises and repeated phrases that they might be saying. It almost seems like a calming strategy. I don't know that it's completely defined, and different behaviors might have different functions. So in students with autism in my personal classroom, I see anxiety levels can be a little higher. When there's changes in the schedule, that can cause meltdowns. Or I have a student who loves doing his homework. In fact, mom requests like 2 homework packets every week. So I give her 2 separate homework packets because he just can't get enough of doing homework. And in the classroom, he wants to be the first one finish on his work every day. So it can cause behaviors. I mean, it sounds like it's a good thing, like that couldn't be a negative, but it actually really interferes with his functioning in the classroom because he wants to rush through his work to be the first one done. And if anyone is finishing before him, he just will have a complete meltdown. So we have to teach him to slow down. And I mean, so for him, the behavior can be a challenge, even though it seems like it's a good thing. He wants to get his work done, but it causes really negative behaviors. So you'll see every student is different. And then I have a student who has behaviors because he doesn't want to do his work at all. So, I mean, but they're similar in nature. It's just the function of it might be a little different. You could see the same exact behavior in one student and the same exact student behavior in another student, but there's different reasons for that behavior. So behavior, it seems simple, but it's actually quite complicated. So it takes really good observational skills, and what might be a reason for behavior one day might be a different reason for that behavior the next day. So it's always important to be evaluating that if you are seeing some behavior challenges in the classroom. The sensory characteristics are that typically students with autism have sensory challenges, and this could tie into their neurological development. It seems like the brain isn't processing information in the same way that a typical person is processing information. Like I'm processing sounds and temperatures and smells and stuff in a certain way that my brain can make sense of it. But it seems like for a student with autism, their sensory challenge, their systems get a little bit like overloaded where they can't process out sounds in the same way. They might be extremely overwhelmed. Things get confusing. It could almost be like a shock on their system. And many times we see the behaviors are a result of some of these sensory challenges that they have. So it could be that they might be seeking certain sensory activities and avoiding other sensory activities. So in one sense, they're sensory seeking, and in another sense, they might be sensory avoiding. An example of this would be a student who loves to smell things, and it doesn't even matter if it's a bad smell or a good smell. They want to smell everything they have to smell. He's putting his nose on the carpet. He's putting his nose on other people, on his paper, on his book. He seems very like he wants to smell everything. Maybe for another student, they don't want to smell anything at all. Smells can be really overwhelming to them. They might be avoiding smells. So while one student might be seeking out a sensory, another student could be avoiding it. So again, this is where our students are very similar and yet so different, because the way that it impacts them, the way that it creates maybe some challenges for them could be a problem. Now, I've noticed sometimes too that in some of my students, they might have very sensitive hearing. They might be really attuned to sounds or noises that we might not even be perceiving. It could be a sound from the light. An interesting thing I've noticed though, that some of these students who are very sensitive to the sounds are very like can be more music, a little bit more musically inclined too. So that might be, it could also be a strength for them. So I like to look for turning challenges into strengths. So that's something to consider. Communication and language characteristics. It's there, we see deficits in these areas with our students. Again, it's going to impact them in different ways, but this affects their ability to communicate their wants and needs, which could lead to frustration. They might be able to not be able to explain to us what they're feeling inside their bodies. They might not be able to express their emotions in the same way. They might not be able to engage or interact in those conversations with peers in the same way that you or I might, or a typical person. So they might be very like they can talk, but all they want to talk about is their area of interest. Like maybe it's dinosaurs. All they want to talk about is T-Rexes and Brontosauruses and Stegosauruses. And I like dinosaurs too. But it might be that's the only thing they could talk about. So when they're littler, it's a little bit easier for them to navigate their social worlds. But when they hit middle school, high school, if they're still talking about dinosaurs and you know, everyone else is talking about Justin Bieber or whatever, they're going to be a little bit ostracized from their peers. I like that this week we're talking about some of those social groups, which I think can really help our students to interact with other students, but it also helps their peers to understand them a little bit better, to be able to come down onto their level and engage with them. And it really, really helps our students with their self-esteem, being able to have friends across campus. I've seen it have great progress, but our students still have those language delays, and often they need to be taught specifically how to communicate with through scripting, through video modeling or role modeling play, lots of repetition, specific lessons, and encouragement. Always encouraging them to use those skills that they're learning so that they generalize them into real world life. So it might be that you're teaching the students to say, hi, how are you? Like maybe they're only focused on themselves and they don't think about what other people are feeling or what other people's thoughts are. So they like dinosaurs, they're going to assume everybody likes dinosaurs and that's all they want to talk about. And that's all you should care about too. But they don't understand that maybe you have different interests that I could ask you questions about. What do you like? So we might have to teach them things like asking other students real focused questions and making those interactions more meaningful for them. So some students might not be able to communicate at all. They might be totally mute or have very limited ability to speak. And in those instances, having an alternative form of communication is extremely important, such as an augmentative device. iPads are becoming pretty popular now that are specifically programmed to use a form of like PEX, which is the picture exchange communication system, which used to, before we had all this great technology, we had little cards that we had to make. It was very tedious to make all them and laminate them and Velcro them and have a book. And then you have to have a way to organize all those pictures, which was really great for students in the beginning because, you know, it gave them a means to communicate. But now with technology, it's really great that we have these like right at our fingertips. But it does also have its challenges because you have to program these devices regularly to keep it updated with what things that they need to talk about. It could be delayed if a teacher is doing a lesson on something and they're talking about, let's say, habitats or something, and the student doesn't have that language in his program, in his iPad, programmed into his iPad, he might have limited ability to engage in discourse. If he can't actually type out words, then maybe we could have ideally some time to collaborate with a speech pathologist so we could program icons in, or if the teacher is able to program some of those in herself. But again, that takes time and that's something we don't have a lot of. So the social characteristics we kind of touched on in the communication section 2. That's going to be, they have typically a lot of difficulty socializing with their peers. Those social times in their day, in their school day, could be the most difficult. So academically, they might be doing really, really great and be on track. I have students that almost didn't even qualify for my special ed class because cognitively, academically, they're doing really well, but the students are having meltdowns in the classroom, threatening violence and stuff in the gen ed classroom, and meltdowns, running out the door, running away, screaming, because the social difficulties were so hard for them to manage. I see this a lot at playground times. Often when I'm going to pick up my class, something happened almost every single day. Something happened, there's some issue, because they really struggle socializing or having appropriate social skills with their peers. They might not understand personal space. They might not understand your body language. They might not understand if what I'm doing is annoying somebody, or what I'm doing is inappropriate too. We have to typically teach them these things. They seem to be um, lacking in their ability to understand other people's feelings and thoughts and emotions, or being able to put themselves into someone else's shoes. Like we see some students who are quite social, and then some that are completely content to kind of sit by themselves. In fact, when they're sitting with others, they struggle when they're by themselves, or they're happy. But I always want to encourage my students to be able to make social connections and learn how to sit with the peers and not be ostracized. Like inclusion is really important. So it kind of works on both sides. We want our students to understand better social etiquette and social skills to be able to fit in. And we want to also teach other students acceptance and inclusion too is important. So that concludes my talk at this time. Thank you for listening to me.